everyone to the last session of today's first days of conference. And it's going to be a roundtable. Here with me are Sebastiano Nata and Alberto Prunetti, so our two writers in residence for this conference. So just briefly to give you an idea of how it's going to work, we have an hour and a half. We are going to have a discussion between our two writers for about an hour. And then we're going to have half an hour Q&A sessions. If you have questions or curiosities, we're going to open to the floor. So let's start, and we hope you will enjoy it. So I'll just very briefly give you like a short introduction of both our guests. So Sebastiano Nata, so he lived in Rome, which we wanted to point out because also the geographical background are different, so we'll see if and to what extent that will be relevant for them. He's a writer, and he lived both in Italy and abroad, throughout Europe, Latin America. He got a degree in political science and was, for a few years, will tell us more about that, executive vice president of MasterCard Worldwide. And in addition of being a writer, he also is a cultural agent, like in Italy, because he is active, also has a member of the editorial board of Edizioni Atlantide.
Which is a small editor, yes.
But
editorial board, yes, yeah. It may sound big company.
Okay. But yeah, we're going to explore also your role not only as a writer, but also... Ok, meglio? Ok, sì, scusate. So yeah, like double role as writer, but also working in the publishing industry. And just a brief overview of his novels. So he wrote the first one in 1995, Il Dipendente. Then we have Resistente del Motore in 1999, Mentre ero via in 2004, Il valore dei giorni in 2010, La mutazione 2014, Tenere l'acqua 2020, and the latest one, Memoria di un infedele, in 2023. So, thank you for this rich material that we're going to discuss and see today. And I'm moving to the second writer, Alberto Prunetti. He's from Lublin instead. He is both a writer and translator, in addition of also working in the publishing industry. In fact, he is the founder of the Working Class series in Edizioni Allegre, which he founded in 2018. He also moved both in Italy and outside, UK, Argentina, India, so we have like a broad experience. And he's also in the editorial board of Carmilla, Nuova Rivista Letteraria, and Giacomo in Italia, among other magazines. Yes, for his main works, he started in 2003 with Potassa. All of these are novels. 2009, Il fioraio di Peron. 2012, 14, and now in 23, the new edition of Amianto, Una storia operaio, with Feltrinelli, starting with Agenzia X and then Edizioni Allegre. Then we have in 2020, Nel girone dei bestemmiatori. And in 2022, Non è un pranzo di gala, which is not a novel, but more an overview of working literature. So, and a couple of short stories also in collections in L'arte della fuga and Sorcibè. Okay, so brief introduction, and we're going to move to our first questions, and we'll start the discussion. So, although you both dedicated large part of your work to representations of labor, however, the results and the type of stories you wrote are quite different. And we think it's also partly because of your different background, not only geographical, but also in terms of working experience. So how do you think that your background impacted on your writing? But also perhaps more specifically, what kind of models you have when it comes to representation? So thinking more, is it more visual, so more related to cinema, or is it more literary, or simply like for written works, so perhaps not literature, but more essay. If you have narrative models or literary models, are they more Italian or more European? So can you give us more idea of how your background, both experiential and narrative, literary, impacted on your work?
You have a go. So the old one will go first.
So a little bit about me as a social background. So my father always says that the decadence of the family started with me, because until my working experience there was like from I would say a social viewpoint, a bourgeois viewpoint, a growth. So my grandfather was a farmer. My grandfather was an employee of the state at the low level. Then there was a jump with my father because he became a chief surgeon. And then he kept telling me, and with you, Sebastiano, the family started going down. And we will see if it is true or not. And my working experience did have a big impact on my writing, and I will try to explain why. But I spent 10 years in the Italian Bankers Association, which was a very quiet place. And then I joined a multinational where I stayed for almost 30 years. So I had, let's say, the chance and the privilege to really breathe both an economic growth of the company. I will tell you a couple of numbers about that. But also it was a shock for me because coming from, as I said, an association which is a quiet place, to go to a company where everything was focused on maximizing the profits, it was a shock. And let's say the result of that shock was Indipendente, my first book, in which I, without any, let's say, model, apart from a model in terms of style, which is a model that writers shouldn't try to follow because it's so fantastic that usually it's a trap. But anyhow, my model was Céline in telling this story. And this is the story of a manager who felt at a certain moment that he was growing, like my family before, but in the end he was trapped, and then it clashes with the reality until he actually loses his own control and personality. So let's say during my work life, which still has, but had a major impact on me as a person and as a writer, there were two different, I would say, feelings. One was excitement. Yes, because if you work in a multinational, which makes a lot of money, you do make a lot of money yourself, there is this temptation of being a winner. So there is excitement, like we are growing a lot. So just a number on that. When MasterCard went public, the value of MasterCard was 5% of Unicredit, okay? So it was like nothing, and 10% of BNP Paribas. I'm telling you that because, let's say, and now, let's say, MasterCard values is 10 times the value of Unicredit. So from a capitalistic viewpoint, was a fantastic experience. So this is the excitement. The other thing is that, and this is what I try to explore in my books, is that the counterbalance of that is that this extreme focus from a personal viewpoint on making money, making a career, and so on and so forth, may make you to lose your balance and the real values of your life, which are linked, in my view, to the relationships with your peers. And this is what I have been trying to, let's say, talk about my books. And what I would say, it was not a conscious decision. Let's say, whenever I start a book, I always tell myself, okay, you have to write a funny novel. So, and Alberto has just read Il Dipendente, and yes, there is some funny pages, but I think the real feeling is more the angoisse, let's say, and anxiety. So because also so this is because today I saw obviously what you presented so interesting about art and especially literature and work. And I thought to myself, Gaetano, but when you started, especially the first books, I didn't have any awareness of where I wanted to go. So it was more, I started with a sentiment that in most of the cases was anxiety and unsatisfaction, because I was in a way losing my life. And then I always try, whenever I start a story, to put the balance inside me. So to say, in writing, you will be, I wouldn't say happier, but less tense, okay? I almost never achieve that objective, but still, I keep trying. And also, perhaps the other thing is that I try to, let's say, convey a message, even if it's not built as a message, but to reveal a reality which is not essential. It is not often what the reality is perceived. For example, the character of a successful manager, or the image of a manager was, when I wrote Il Dipendente in '95, the image of a winner. But this is not the reality. He was, especially from a human viewpoint, a real loser. And during the story, I think the reader should understand that. I think I can stop here, because otherwise,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry. Well, I always feel a bit uncomfortable when I speak English, mainly because I learned English quite late. I was nearly 30 years old, and also because I learned English when I was a minimum wage worker in England, working as a cleaner and a kitchen assistant. So I'm not really trained in discussing in English, not even my experience, even less my job as a writer. Okay, so it was English was just the language of the master, and I was supposed just to listen and do something, and not really use this language to express myself. But I'll try. And what can I say? Yeah, my background is absolutely linked with my my writing. Of course, I come from a family with a working class background. My grandfather was a mason builder, and my father was a welder and how to say, specialized worker, working mainly in steel mills and oil refineries. And even maybe, according to my father, even my experience was just going down and down, so till the industrial publishing, that is the loss, the end of the story. But here I am. I would say that my background has to do always with my writing, especially because when I wrote the last the bigger part of my stories, I was still working as a how to say a manual laborer, mainly not in factories, but mainly in restoration, in food industries, and restaurants, pizzeria, and so on, all other minimum wage jobs. And when you work so heavily, and you work such a lot of hours of time, at the end of the day, if you try to write something, you cannot avoid to write with the memory of the life you are dealing with, no? So even when I was writing and I had the noise of the forks going inside the dish machine of the restaurant, so there was no way, I could have not even the privilege to write some fictional things. I was obliged to do with my life. So it was not something that I chose to do. I had no other choice but writing about my own experience. And so this is the first thing. In some way, even I always say that our bodies are classed. That means that even if I'm now with 1 feet outside, 1 foot, 1 feet, I don't know, outside my original class, because maybe I work in the lower level of the publishing industry. In some way, my physical body posture, it's a memory or the place from which I come from. So it's not so easy to cut this link, these memories. About the second part of your question, genres and influences, I would say that in my experience, cinema was relevant. And of course, especially the kind of cinema that I was, when I was a young boy with a working class origin, I was exposed more to my father, that was the spaghetti western movies. So both the Italian side, the spaghetti, that is Sergio Leone, for instance, but also the some crepuscular North American movies like the Peking Part 1. So this imaginary was relevant to even to my writing in some way. And then there was a lot in narrative that for me was relevant, both Italian and especially British, I would say. From the Italians, some narrative inquiry about like Luciano Bianciardi works was relevant to me, like George Orwell's Inquire on the Miners. I'm thinking about the Road to Wigan Pier, for instance. And also later on, especially when I wrote 108 metri, that was the narrative transposition of my life as a migrant in the UK, all the British tradition of working class novels were relevant to me, from Alan Sillitoe, so it's the 60s, till Irving Welsh in some way. So and also I would say the British wave of movie directors like Ken Loach, that are writers that just interested in the working classes experience, and sometimes also directors, artists coming from a working class background too. So just to put shortly, that were points relevant to me, but of course I had also to discuss other lines like the French narrative of the transfuge, the transport de classe, you know. I was exposed to this narrative later on, but that was relevant some way to me, like Thierry Bonneau or Near Arnaud, that were far from my way of writing, even because I didn't really have been thinking to myself as a transfugue, but in some way I always found myself in trouble, so inside the class. But all these lines were relevant.
Thank you very much to both of you. Actually, I have so many follow-up questions already, but I'll try to avoid those, but perhaps if we have time, I'll ask them later. And since we touched also upon, my next question was actually about how much autobiographical experience impacted on your work, but since you touched upon these already, perhaps we can also expand a bit. And what we were discussing also in preparing this roundtable, so going a bit by contrast. So you are both male writers, and so we were considering like how, and you wrote about your autobiographical experience as male authors and male workers. How much instead looking at the other side about how much the gender dimension enters your work? So what about female characters? So as far as I recall, there are no female protagonists in your work, but female characters do appear, right? And so we're wondering how, since autobiographical experience is so important for you, how do you find to build a female character? Were they also based on your experience, like with friends and other people, or so yeah? How did you approach that these like female characters, and in general, how do you see the gender dimension featuring in your work and in working literature in general? Alternate.
So I cannot answer this very sexistic, let's say, statement, but I cannot answer like Simenon, where you know that Simenon is told to having get 10,000, let's say, partners,
okay.
Let's say, paid and unpaid. And when he was at that time, I think that it was not as scandal as it would have been today. He answered, he said, oh, but in my books there are so many female characters, I needed to know some women. So this is, let's say, the answer. So let's say when we talk about personal experience, it's not personal experience with just ourselves, so the relationship with us. I think that you can, obviously, at least in my case, I believe I know myself better than anybody else than me, both male and female. So, and also, let's say, I know very well my own emotions, because novels have to be based on emotions as well, even if we have been talking about social issues here. So usually the main character is, yes, a white man, let's say between medium class and high class. I will say a few things about that. Which is focused on his career. Okay, so let's say, and all these characters usually are unhappy. So the main characters are unhappy, and throughout each novel there is an increasing level of awareness. And I would say, if you say that, if you look at the first one, Indipendente, and the last one, Memoria di un infedele, so the protagonist of the Indipendente doesn't manage to be really aware. He's in the middle of something that he doesn't understand, and he will be destroyed in the end by his anxiety. The protagonist of Memoria di un infedele is a much older man who, throughout the book, realizes that he has lost his life even if he is rich. Okay, so there is a higher level of awareness, and in the end he says, okay, I am not left with too many years, but let's try to live the years that I have in front of me in a wiser way. So spending more time with the people he loves, and also to start understanding the reality. Because when you work so hard, and let's say on that, I think Alberto's experience and my experience is pretty much similar. You are not left with a lot of time to study or to read or to understand. So life becomes like closer and closer and closer. So in the end, let's say Tommaso, who is the protagonist of Memorie di un infedele, tells himself, yes, let's try to spend more time in knowing art, loving your tears, and so on and so forth, which is also, let's say, a suggestion that many philosophers give, including Schopenhauer, just to say one, who was an unhappy man, but wrote a lot about happiness and how to be happy. Now, which is the role of the female in my books? So this is, let's say, always talking about the first one and the next one. So I think that the female characters are the ones, regardless their age, that live life in a more authentic way, and also are linked to what matters in life really. And in different ways, throughout, let's say, the different stories that I tell, they try to convert their man, being a father or a husband or like a friend, telling them, listen, you're just devoting all yourself to, I would say, the capitalistic myths, which are power and money. But what about the relationships which enrich life? Obviously, all that has to be conducted to the reader in a subliminal way, because in the novels you cannot say things straight, because the novels, in my view, lose power if you just put the things straight. So it's more the suggestion, and always there is this ambiguity in terms of emotions and wave of living. But to cut a very long story short, in my novels, the female characters are the wise ones, the more authentic ones, and the men are often lost into the middle of unimportant wars.
And actually, I realized I was wrong, because in Tenere l'Acqua, Paola, you do alternate chapters,
yes,
and some chapters do take the point of view of Paola.
Yes.
So actually, you did take the perspective of a female character in that sense. So, I stand corrected.
Okay. Well, I think here the reply has to do mainly with the role of my mother, because the most important work I wrote is the story of my father, Amianto. And if you read the book, very often the readers tell me, where is the mom? Where is the mother? Okay. I would say that in some way she's on the back of the camera. She's shot in the picture. So this is one of the reasons why you don't see her, because she's on the other side. Because I brought the book through the help of her, and of her tales, and she's in some way the author.
Like
a co-author, yeah. Well, to be honest, there was much more about my mother in the first manuscript I wrote of Amianto. My mom is also the first editor of my work, and after I wrote before publishing, I sent her my manuscript. I gave her, and she told me, I like it, but I want you to remove all the part in which you talk about me. And I said, okay. And when I asked her why, she mainly, she cut it briefly telling that people like us you don't read in books stories about people like us. Okay, like that we are not deserving a book because we are commoner in some way. On the other hand, I realized that I had to respect her will not to appear. In the last year there was a wave, especially I would say in the British publishing industry, of novels, memoirs mainly, exploring the life of working class women, and that is I think is a good point because it's very often is a way to deal with traumas and telling our own story with our own words, and that is part even of my imaginary. I always say that the working class people has to tell their own story with their own words, and the same has to do with the gender. So even we say female women has to tell their story without passing through the filter of a male voice. That is why also I'm trying, more than writing female characters in the publishing line that I editing, I prefer to have female voices, female authors. That's why we published, for instance, Cash Carraway's Skin State. That was an important book, a memoir about a woman living under the level of poverty in the modern day Britain. But to be back to my mother opposition, even Cash Carraway, I discussed with her some trouble that she had exposing her life to the readers. And she told me that very often she has found herself exposed to a kind of voyeuristic middle-class reader that was interested in doing a kind of poverty porn on the life of women, working-class women. And I think that my mom is not able to articulate such a complicated answer, but I think that I had to respect her will. Not to be exposed, because I would like my mom to tell her story with her own story, with her own words, deciding how much telling and how much to tell. I would say that during my trilogy, I found always a bigger space from the life of my mom, but it took to me 10 years to negotiate this space. So that is a problem. I mean, the working class people are not so confident in their life, not so self-confident. No? It's a bit the kind of impostor syndrome that you have. What my life has to do with a novel. And it took to me 10 years to make space for her. But if I would say, okay, I don't care, I just need to write her story, that would be a kind of appropriation of her story and the lack of respect for her life. So that's why I decided to take this long step to arrive to tell her story. In the meanwhile, I did my best to publish female writers in my line, in my publishing series.
Thank you. And as academics, we are familiar with imposter syndrome, so I think we can relate to that. But yeah, actually, what you said about this appropriation is, of course, a theme that is becoming more and more prominent here. And I think there is a few interesting things about what you said about finding one's voice as an author, but also at the same time building your audience, because as you said, like, there are readers are not interested in my life or in my experience, so I feel watched or seen by a kind of higher middle class. And I think perhaps we can go back to it later. This is where also your work has more cultural agent in publishing industry comes in. So you're also working to build an audience, and so we might get back to that later. But
okay.
Thank you both. Broadening a bit our gaze, so we've talked about your protagonists and as your kind of avatar counterparts, as the female dimension, female characters. Staying on the topic of characters, so of course, like you are talking about like the work environment, so that is where you want to portray your characters as embedded in a working environment, working relation, but of course we are also embedded in interpersonal relations, so this is where the network of characters comes in, so it's also a human network and mesh. So I was wondering if you can say something more about how you think of the network of characters as a human mesh in which your characters are embedded, and moving a bit also outside and towards the reader. What kind of, you touched a bit already upon that, what kind of relation you want to establish, you want your readers to establish with your characters? So are they usually more like straightforwardly empathetic reactions or identification, or rather like a more mixed of the two? So what kind of relationship do you whether, if you think about that at all, do you try to design a relationship for your reader to build with your characters, or not? If you can say something more about that.
Yeah, and perhaps before what I would like to expand a little bit about, let's say, what are we writing about? Because I think that there is sometimes a confusion which created me a lot of personal problems about the books, because even if we do write, there is nothing, I mean, there is like the normal sentence, this story has nothing to do, blah, blah, blah. Some people think that, or thought that I was talking about them, okay? Which is, in my view, apart from perhaps, I think is never true, in the sense that each novel, each character is not just one character, it's a summary of different characters. Some of these different characters can be closer to you, some others you just saw them, some others you have just imagined them. But to overlap reality with literature is extremely dangerous for your relationship. So because, and actually this is not true also, because talking about which is the relationship with the reader. Okay, what I try, I think Alberto, he will say what he thinks, but most probably has the same approach. You try to make your story true and appealing at the very same time. And also the structure has to be solid, and the character has to be different one from another, and there has to be some tensions, and so on and so forth. So all these objectives can be reached if you are not a genius, and definitely I'm not, if you always make a mixture of things. And the three elements are what you have personally experienced, what you have seen in others, and what you have just invented. So, and the author has the privilege to say, okay, on that character, we do not say, listen, 40% is linked to you, 20% to this other person. This is up to us. We do not reveal that also, because perhaps we haven't even forgotten that. So let's say everything is at the service of the story, of the emotion that you want to convey, and in a lot of cases you had, and therefore a reality is one element. A reality is one element. Another thing that I want to say about that is this theory, let's say Hemingway's theory of the iceberg. Okay, so let's say Hemingway says that what the reader reads, it's only the top of the icebergs, but everything is supported by what is not seen, and it is not said openly. So, and this is also, and this is why the personal experience is so important, because you can, in my view, let the reader think, experience, and emotion without openly saying that, only if you know that piece of reality very well inside out. Otherwise, you have to explain it because you don't know it yourself. So I've seen it that the pieces of reality that I know better, I can say, let's say, in a few sentences, what that piece of reality is all about. If I don't know it, I have, let's say, the tendency is to give a lot of explanation because you don't really know it. I'm thinking loudly now, but it's almost like in a relationship with the person. The closer the relationship is, the less messages you have to give openly, because that person understands you in a way, because you know each other so well. And this is also what perhaps a writer has to try to build with the reader. You keep, let's say, building a relationship through your story, so you let the reader imagine a lot of things instead of being open. But I forgot your question.
You partly answered, but you are like welcome to expand a bit more. It was more about if you, just to make it simplified, if you are expecting your readers to empathize only with your characters, or if you think about a trajectory of some sort that the reader should follow in growing more empathetic with the character and understanding them, or it's not a crucial part of your planning?
So this is something that I don't plan. Perhaps there is a hope. Let's hope that I will manage to engage the reader, but this is not something that I plan. Let's say there was an evolution in my relationship with the writing and the readers. So at the beginning, what I was interested in is just to share what I felt. Share what I felt in the sense, this is my experience, I'm telling you my experience, or even what I imagine, without, let's say, imagining what the message could be or which battle I want to fight. Let's say, more and more now, I think that the capitalistic world is so bad that, and I will give you again numbers about that, that I think that if somebody has a certain talent of conveying emotions and going against this unique thinking, you better use your talent. So this is, but because, let's say, because one of my closest friends, who is like a new liberal, told me, and I took it as an offense, but in fact could have been a compliment. He told me, Gaetano, your book, the last one, is a dangerous one, because you go against capitalism and you know you are wrong. So I said, I tried to, he's a mathematician and a philosopher, let's say, even if he doesn't do anything because he lives with the capital he has, but this is another story. He's very intelligent. And I didn't convince him, nor he convinced me, but how can a system be the right system is if, let's say, one of 10, let's say 10% of the population is suffering, doesn't have enough food on one side. And then, let's say, I read 2 or 3 days ago that in 2022, the military expenses were 2,240 billion US dollars. 2,240 240 billion US dollars. Now, and there are 900 million people not having enough food, which lives with less than $1.25 a day. Now, if, let's say, 1/3 of these military expenses would have been invested in solving the hunger problem would have been solved. Now, a society who doesn't see it as a key problem is a blind society, in my view. So I think that if the writers, even telling a love story, somewhat can remind that, it would be useful.
Okay, thank you. I'll slightly add something. We were thinking, I should have perhaps been more specific also, but since your books, as you said, are very much about emotions, that answer made perfect sense for you. This empathetic reaction or unempathetic is also very much in relation to labor, to work, and to the class condition that you are portraying. So we are also thinking about that. So are you more trying to trigger empathy and understanding towards a certain situation, or actually rejecting and denunciare, now English is failing me, the condition of another class or the attitude of another class. So also that, empathetic reactions also in relation to portrayal of workers specifically.
Okay. Well, first thing I would say, yes, I try to do my best with characters. I would say that the dimension of characters is deeper than the plot of my story. And there is a story, there is a reason for this, because my characters are common people. Well, we have very often this idea about plot as something which a person, a character, a hero is doing something, but maybe is transforming his own awareness or reality at the end of the story. No? So you have, I don't know, you have a hero looking for something, or you have another hero going back, like Ulysses going back to his native island, finding lots of messy situation and restoring order. Well, while I think this is a kind of middle class story, because in reality, common people, they never alone, at least alone, common people cannot transform reality. So why should I write novels in which a character is able to transform reality? That was an objection I took at the beginning when editors were telling your characters don't transform even themselves and not even reality, of course. They are working class characters, and if you are a working class person, at least things can go worse, but you don't have to transform alone. You can do it with collective action, right? That is a principle thing. So I had to work more, I think, on character, and less on plot. In Amianto, the plot was given. It was given. It was the death of my father. In 108 metri, it was a journey to an island, a treasure island, and but there was no treasure for me, just minimum wage pay. So I decided to work a lot on character, and in some way I think I succeeded in that. I received a very bad review by a famous conservative paper, tabloid, it is the Daily Mail, and I think it's a badge of honor for every writer having a bad review by the Daily Mail. They say that I was a kind of very old, sweary Italian lefty, writing nonsense stories with in an immigrant stream of consciousness. So it was quite fair, quite interesting. This is about also to do political cancel culture and so on. That was a mainstream British review. But they say they admitted that my character were funny and well built. So I work on character. I had on the one side I had a long tradition of a monodimensional but depiction of working class character. And so I decided to work a lot on that, giving a more complex depiction of these characters. So you find some also very strange characters. When I describe my colleagues, cleaners, they were cleaners working in toilets. I describe them with like very cultivated guys talking with about very nasty things with the very high language register. That was quite against the stereotype on them, but it was true. I worked with a Shakespearean actor. He was in some way insane, but he was a nice guy, and he helped me a lot to provide me, to take care of my moral life, discussing the work of Shakespeare with me while we were cleaning very dirty plates in a canteen in England. So I had to, it wasn't much to them to provide this richness, and on the other hand, I had not really, and I realized this especially while I was reading your work, Independent, that I found very caricatural, if that word makes sense in English, the depiction of the working class guys. But even myself, I had no really a genuine idea of which is the life of the upper class people, because I was not really confident with that word. So when I had the upper class people I was linked with were mainly the managers, so they were very lower middle class guy. But I had to decide how to portray two classes in some way, and I chose for a literary approach. I decided my colleagues were supposed to be Stevensonian, so in some way I described them through the lenses of the work of Stevenson, especially of one of the novels I loved more when I was a young guy, that is The Treasure Island, of course. And the class enemy was to be Lovecraftian. So on the other hand, you don't have you will not find a good depiction of Margaret Thatcher, for instance. I will provide them a kind of jellyfish description, like kind of octopus of a monster, and that was working well because the guy on the Daily Mail, when they put the bad review against me, they put Margaret Thatcher picture. That was the place where that was outing to them. It was the way in which I described Maggie. So I think it worked.
Yes, like as you said, the best review actually they got.
Yeah, it was. It is on the wall now. It is.
Yeah, actually, I'm really glad that these two answers brought to light what I think is, if we want to juxtapose or like compare your work, indeed, like this character versus plot has focus, partial attention is indeed perhaps what catalyzes the difference that you perceive in reading your work. So yeah, thank you for expanding on that. I'll do one last question perhaps, and then I'm sure there are going to be questions and curiosities. And we wanted to link it back to the subtitle of our conference, so posture and positionality. So I wanted to ask you what kind of posture you take as an author. So what kind of image you give of yourself as an author, which is also linked in a sense to what are the reasons that you think make you entitled to tell certain stories. So if you present yourself as just someone who lived those experiences, or someone also who were able to tell them specifically, which is also linked to your work perhaps as in publishing industry, so being able to tell stories, not just experiencing them. But yeah, I don't want you to to steal too much of your words, but yeah. So how you position yourself as an author, what kind of image you give of yourself. And yeah, we've also wanted a bit more to hear more about how you relate your work as author to your work in the publishing industry. So to another type of intellectual and cultural engagement. If you can say just a few minutes, and then we can open to.
So I actually asked Carlo, because I didn't know the meaning of these two words, okay. Posture and positionality, right? So he explained me very well. So what I took from his explanation is, let's say, positionality is where you come from. So he said, you are a white man, what about a black woman? He said. So this is a very good explanation, I will talk about that. And then posture, what I've understood is, let's say, which is your attitude towards reality, and especially what I got is the winning thoughts these very days, which are linked to the new liberalism and so on and so forth. So let's start about posture. What I was discussing with Alberto is that we have a totally different background. We write totally different story, because he's telling about the working class, I'm telling about, let's say, the managerial class. So really, but in the end, we are coming to the very same. So the positionality is opposite, but the posture, in my view, is the same. So we are very critical about, let's say, the reality. Another discussion that we had, which I think it was very interesting, is that he describes in both the books that I wrote, so 108 metri and Amianto, essentially what may happen to the body of the working class, that over time may be destroyed. Okay, this is not necessarily a risk for the high class, because the body is protected. For example, during COVID-19, all the offices of the multinational were super safeguarded, closed, all the health measures and so on and so forth. But the danger is that the mind of these people who have to take important decisions is somewhat manipulated by the needs of the capitalism. So let's say, I liked a lot, let's say, the strong position that the father of, let's say, Amianto, so because he was proud in a way to his work. So he was proud about his relationship with his colleagues and co-workers. So there wasn't, for example, among them a competition, but more a solidarity. So let's say the mind, in my view, the body was destroyed, in fact, in the end he died, but the mind was somewhat safeguarded by his father and his colleagues, because there was this solidarity. In the high class, not the very, very high class, so the 81 multi-billionaires who owns half of the world wealth. So keep the numbers in mind. On one side, 81, on the other side, 4 billion, the very same wealth. But let's say what let's say is at risk is the mind of these let's say high-level class or managers, because there is no solidarity whatsoever. So in my book he said, no, but solidarity is like is Babbo Natale for the working class. We don't believe in solidarity, of course, and because everybody is in competition. So in a multinational, you have a boss, you have a number of subordinates, and you have rivals. You don't have friends. So, and this is obviously, let's say, it's not a paradise, it's a disaster for yourself, because you always feel alone and against something. So you have to receive orders, give orders. You don't have people with whom you can share your weaknesses, for example. So the thing, this is, in my view, this is very interesting in the sense that what Alberto describes is a man who was proud of his humble but, let's say, very useful job. And what I describe is more the hell in the mind of people who are always trying to achieve something which is not important in competition with the others. And this is why, in the end, we have, in my view, the same posture. We are very good.
Thank you. Thank you for this articulate answer.
Sorry, no. I was taking notes because it was quite interesting what you were saying. Sometimes when I talk with workers, even workers tell me, this is something aside from your questions, but it's interesting just to have a bit of dialogue, because very often workers tell me, now working is different, even working class are different from the past. The age of your father, there was more solidarity, now we are under pressure there. And I think that is an example of how upper class, upper level logic just dropped down, poisoning even the working life of the lower class, because this attitude, so you have this poison without even the privilege, because at least the upper class can get some privilege from that kind. And if you are a working class person, without solidarity, you are lost. That is it. So, aside from that, back to the posture question, well, very often just put question, because now it's nearly 10 years that I am outside. I've been working for 10 years, at least, in the outside the industry of book, in restaurants and so on. Now it's more than 10 years that I'm working in the book industry, and in which I have different roles. By one author is one of them, and so I have to question myself about what I'm doing after 10 years. And well, there are different postures that I'm not really that one that I would choose. On the one side, you have a kind of old-fashioned posture that is a bit the Gianni Rodari posture, that when he was saying, I don't write for my publisher, I write for the working class, no? I say, no? On the other, you have a kind of, I think, solitary approach, the idealistic approach, in which you have a writer thinking that is, again, transforming reality. That would be, according to me, a mistake. You know, if I would say that, sometimes people tell me, you have introduced the word working class literature in Italy, there was not something like that before. Now they are discussing things like that in the academics. There is a publishing series. We did a really amazing literature festival dedicated to this kind of works. We are translating novels, exporting novels in Europe. Well, I don't think, I would say that this is not, it was a goal, but it's not something that I did. It's, perhaps I've been working on these things for 10 years, and I could move things just something like that. In the last 2 years, we had a strong mobilization of a few hundreds of workers in Florence, the JKM workers. And I think that they've been doing for the working class imaginary more in 6 months than what I've been doing in 10 years. I mean, I spent 10 years of my life building a working class imaginary, but I was working alone, like a middle class guy. they've been working together in a solidary way as a worker, and they succeeded in 6 months. So if we did something like the Working Class Festival, it is not thanks to me, it's thanks to them, because they built a new connection between workers, community, citizens, that open a factory to the communities living around the factory, for instance. So if I should put together the things, I would say that in some way there is, on the one side we have literature works, on the other side we have social conflicts, and in the middle there is imaginary. I don't think that, I would say that social conflict provide a push to literature works that in some way provide another push to imaginary, and so on, like a circle. But the more effective movement has been done by the social conflict. So social conflict to me are relevant more than my own writing. I cannot do nothing as a writer without social workers. And my works in some way, I hope, can be helpful to the social conflict. That is the best I can decide. So the other posture would be very idealistic. The writer, like in some way, transforming reality. I don't really believe to this the idea. It's true, we have work on the imaginary. We must also build an audience. That is something that I think is our next step. Because very often our audience is a middle class audience. I think this is good because I believe it's possible to have to attract middle class people, because middle class people are getting poorer and poorer because they are exposed to exploitation. As you work can testify as well, no? But we must in some way let them understand the relevance of our stories, and we must ask them not to judge our characters, our story. They should do the effort to read that not in a position of comfort, but try to put the shoes in the same mud in which our stories are written. Otherwise, they will always read us with a kind of filial compassion that will describe us as victim or very, unlucky person and so on. So this kind of compassion is not important. Empathy is important, I think. Empathy is a push for solidarity, and we need even the solidarity of middle class readers. Even. Because we must look for our working class audience. Very often we read in Italy that many people don't read books, no? And we always, once every year, there's a kind of wave of articles describing Italy as a place in which half of the countries are rude, ignorant, and not reading a book. I'm questioning this post. I say, well, are these people really so rude? Or these people, maybe they don't feel themselves represented in the story that we sell to them. Maybe these stories are too much far from their own life. So I would like to, at least, maybe some people are not so interested nowadays in reading, but that is a bigger problem, no? It has to do with how the imaginary is turning the technological transformation of storytelling and so on. But I do think that it's possible. Many often there are people that tell me, I read Damianto, is the first book I've been reading after 20 years. Old guys, retired people very often tell me this. I think that we have a chance to provide a gate to reading for people that don't feel themselves described in mainstream, on the bracket, middle class publishing industry. So this is one of the challenges that we are facing now. Let's see what we do next year.
in the next 10 years, then. Well, thank you so much to both of you. We have been like a bit longer with the discussion, but I'll be very glad now to open to questions from the audience. So please ask ahead. Yes,
thank you very much for this. It's extremely interesting. I wanted to expand a bit more on the publishing experience, but only as authors. So, what was your experience with the editors? Because sometimes they come from a different positionality. It's not yours. So it's very hard sometimes to make yourself explain to the editor first, and then the audience, like the audience comes later. So I was wondering, what was your relationship with the editors and how did it go? Thank you.
I'll pass it on so you can see like back and forth.
So I read recently a very nice book which collects all Celine's letters to the editors. It's fascinating and very funny because it can be very tough and for good reasons in my view. So I don't have this posture. So because I think the relationship with the editor is very much linked, at least in my experience, linked to your power with the editor. So what the editors look at are two things. One, in my view, more important than the other. The more important one is how much this guy or girl could sell. So how many books could be sold with this story. And so you have to hope that they believe that, yes, this book can sell enough to cover the expenses or even to let them to make some money. The other thing is, and this is the one I count more, even if my books sell, I would say recently, relatively well, is, let's say, I would use a word that perhaps it's a little bit exaggerated, but the prestige. So, okay, this writer perhaps is not a bestseller, but he is somewhat respected in the literature more. Okay. So and this is the game with the publisher. The other game that I have had interesting experience on is who owns the book, who owns the text, how much changes I can make to either make the book better or to make the book more palatable, let's say. So, and this is once again a question of relationship, how much the editor trusts you and how much you trust the one who was tasked to work on your text and so on and so forth. So now I also, so I was lucky because more recently I do work with a publisher who is Atlantide. So I also see how a publisher, I work in the sense that I am one of the managerial, even if it's a small company, people there. So for them, obviously, because usually, let's say most small publisher doesn't make a lot of money, it's important to imagine that there is a story that will attract some readers. And the other thing that I discovered is what Alberto was saying is, let's say, to see which are also the new wave, the new stories that can be somewhat original and interesting. And then just to close on that, let's say I also work on a prize which is called Premio Mastercard Letteratura. And here is where we try to link the freedom of a writer to tell whatever he likes to the responsibility of a writer as a citizen. And the link between these two is that the winner of Premio Mastercard Letteratura has the possibility to distribute the money, which is a lot of money, it's 120,000 euros, to 5 ONG in the way he likes, with some constraints. So to always remind that, okay, to what Alberto said, direct impact on a book on the society, if you are not a star, may be limited, but you as a citizen can make an impact, for example, distributing the money in the most sensible way. Okay.
Yes, thank you also for mentioning that. I forgot to do it like in your introduction, but yes, thanks.
Well, about relationship with the editors. I remember I went in a conference to Bristol, and that on working class writing, and that was one of the topics, you know, how the middle class voice of an editor could overlap with the working class. And I think I've been also questioning about that, about the translation of my works. Even sometimes, even with some good output, for instance, some of my translators are also editor, because the translator is very often, especially in small publishers, the same role. I must admit, I have very good relationship with my translator. I have a very cooperative approach, but of course the sensibility are different. I also had an English translator. She was from, say, middle class origin. I think that she has been really empathetic. She declared immediately to me that her experience were different, and I don't think that you need to be a working class person to translate a working class novel. No? Otherwise, that would put us in trouble. That means that if you are a white person, you cannot translate a black North American novel and so on. And that also at the end you find caged in your own identity. So even myself, I should not read middle class novels because I'm a working class person. So I don't want this kind of situation. And I think the best thing is to communicate, to deal. And she immediately told this to me, and we discussed together all some passages of the book. It was a good relationship and a good translation. But it's true that this is in some way a problem. I think that more, it's not really a textual things, as do, according to me, in the selection, the idea of the moment of the selection of the manuscript. And I do think that very often many working class manuscripts are rejected because there is a lack of empathy from editors that are mainly not from working class origins, backgrounds. Unfortunately, in Italy, we don't have any inquiry on the industry of book from a social class perspective. In Great Britain, they had, and it came out that there are only something like 13% of people from working class origin working in the British industry of book. I think that maybe they are even less because many people tend to romanticize their working class origin in Great Britain, not maybe in Italy. So I think that we need to make space to working class people in the industry of book, and not all, but also in the academics, in the university, in the cultural journalism. That can be important. Also, we need to transform a machinery. We must build an audience, but we need to have more working class people working in the industry of book. And that is a problem because in Italy, we have this industry of book that doesn't pay, or doesn't pay a lot. That means, this doesn't mean that the people are poor. That money, very often people are taking the money from elsewhere, maybe from their families or family propriety and so on. So this is pushing outside many working class people with a degree that maybe to find a job they turn to teaching, because at least it's still precarity, but at least you get every month a wage, while in the industry of book you must send an email telling, I sent you 30 days ago a mail which I was asking money, do you remember me, and so on and so on. So I think we have to work a lot on this. It's not easy. It's an industry in which people are very split. There is not much solidarity. There is no union. No. It's a cultural job that is a good thing, but it's also a pain in the ass.
Yes.
Sì, per favore la moderatrice può tradurre in inglese.
Ma no, ma noi siamo italiani.
For
the audience here.
No, una domanda potrebbe essere per entrambi, ma forse soprattutto per Prunetti, e diciamo come ti posizioni nel momento in cui rivendichi di essere uno scrittore della working class o comunque difendi la letteratura della working class, la vecchia questione del rifiuto del lavoro, che è stata portata anche da una parte della classe operaia, almeno negli anni 70. Io aggiungo solo questo, che per me il rifiuto del lavoro è una questione estremamente complessa e difficile, ma secondo me ha ancora senso porla in questi termini, che il lavoro produce un'enorme sofferenza ovviamente per chi è il più sfruttato nella gerarchia, sofferenza anche perché al lato opposto della gerarchia c'è per esempio la competizione, la solitudine che è stato detto, ma oggi la sofferenza del lavoro si trova un po' a tutti i livelli, anche ed è una sofferenza legata al senso del fare all'interno anche delle istituzioni, che sia la scuola, che siano gli ospedali. Ecco, e quindi come porsi di fronte al lavoro, come orgoglio, come rivendicazione, sapendo che nello stesso tempo veicola un'enorme sofferenza, ovviamente in modo ancora più forte diciamo, per i lavori operai.
I'll briefly
Translate,
yes. So yes, he asked how can you combine the fact of presenting yourself as a working class author while at the same time we are living through a time that is where the question of refusal of work is so important, particularly if we are considering all the suffering that is attached to work at every level, from considering exploitation to the competition, so the more the mind-related, psychological suffering that comes with work, but also with the frustration, perhaps, if I translate that suffering correctly, the frustration about working in a system that is jammed and doesn't seem to get unjammed ever. So yes, how you combine your pride as a working class author with the suffering that is connected to it. I'll start from him, but if you want to add something, go ahead.
Yeah, well, it's complex. It's a complex question answer. It reminds me a lot my arguing between me and my father, because when I grew up in a family of the upper level of the working class, what was supposed to consider the old aristocrazia operaia in some way, so workers with a bigger wage than ordinary workers, but also very proud of the work of their position, in a safer position than other workers, and with this ethic of working well, and this proud. I found myself doing works and jobs in which I was not proud at all. No? So there was, of course, a kind of generational jump. From the manual to the intellectual work, and on the one side, the trap of passion that in some ways trapping you while you are doing cultural job, and you say you find this kind of prestige, but you are not paid. You are paid even less than.
It's more intellectual reward.
Yeah, it's only intellectual sometimes, and I think it's a trap, and I found myself trapped inside your question. So it's difficult to me to provide really an answer. Sometimes I wonder that it would be good to me to have my father reading my book, because I wrote and published my book when, of course, he was already dead. But just to imagine in which way this story could affect his proudness for being a working class, for doing dangerous jobs and so on. And I think in some way that is a kind of ideological poison. They teach you to be proud of the heavy life that you do, like again a kind of reward. No? If you see there's very often many in North England, many, I don't know, the kids, the children of the working class, they've lost their job in the mines, have exposed themselves to lots of kind of testosterone things like fighting, heavy drinking and so on. And I think that was a way to find a kind of masculine identity after the loss of the work, because the idea of work was at the base, the root of the masculine identity in the working class, because they call you working class, so working is in some way is something that defines you. And if you are working class and you don't work, you are in trouble in some way, you are lost, you don't have, because you miss your identity, you know? And so if you don't have your work, maybe you get drunk, maybe you tell a working class story, so maybe what I'm doing now is just a way to compensate my how to say, incapacity, no, how to say, inability to find a proper job in a factory. I don't know, I'm just laughing, but maybe I should put this question again to me alone in front of the mirror, but I'm trapped in your question, don't know. So.
You like to untrap yourself from this
No,
question?
I don't know if I will be able to untrap, but once, let's say, in one of Primo Levi's books, I don't remember which one, he wrote that even in a lager, in a concentration camp, people wanted to build the wall straight. So even if they knew that it was for their enemies, for the people who were crushing them, a good job has to be a good job. Okay? So, and I believe this has a lot of value. So when we say that there is a sort of revolt against the job, the work, I think that is not, this revolt is not in a vacuum. It's linked to the fact that, let's say, if you are a worker, low-level worker, you know that you are exploited. You don't get the right salary. You damage your body, and you don't have any stability now, because it's not like 30 years ago you can lose your job. So it's a nightmare, but not the job in itself, it's the job in our environment, because the job in itself is fantastic. If you love your job, there is nothing, in my experience, nothing less rewarding. So my wife always complains about that, my children used to, like, when you write, I mean, this is the only thing. It's not actually really like that, but if you can do something that you drive in a way, because not that you entirely choose what to do, because this is not always possible, but at least that you can have an impact on your work. This is fantastic, because you realize yourself with your creativity. Now, in most of the jobs now, there is also a book about shit jobs, you know, that sold a lot. So
David Graeber's,
yes,
it's bullshit jobs.
Bullshit jobs, exactly. So the problem is that you don't decide what you do, you don't decide how to do that, and you, in a lot of cases, you don't get enough for your efforts in terms of salary. And this is why there is a refusal of a job. While the job in itself, if you can have a certain level of freedom in choosing it, or at least in doing it in the way you think is more efficient, that have a positive impact on society, but there is nothing more rewarding, even if obviously you also like to have a good time with your friends and peers. So, but the job that we have been imposed in a lot of cases, it's a nightmare. So, and I come to the joy of being involved in the intellectual works. No? Okay, obviously they have to be paid enough, but our counterparts know that there is a lot of joy in doing, in writing, for example, this is the area that I like, because you choose everything. So, okay, but what I tell myself, perhaps they don't even pay me nothing. I mean, the average pay of a writer is much less than an average, an hour.
Hourly.
Yeah, hourly is less than a cleaning person.
Yeah.
But still, the cleaning person has to clean, and that's it in certain hours. You do whatever you like, so you create, or you imagine you can create a world. So that's it. So if you have a certain freedom, which is not the case in most of the cases, working is fantastic. But obviously, if you damage your physique, your mind, you don't get enough wage, you don't establish the objectives, then it's a waste of life. And this is why there is this revolt, in a way.
Thank you. Okay.
Cioè di Carlo è quasi umoristiano.
But I am glad I'm glad that we could close on a joyful note.
Portiamo a casa il risultato, sto dicendo.
Yes.
Prima del Prunetti di Canabà, chiudiamo.
È andato bene finora.
On a joyful note, and final one, I'll wrap it up now, and I would like you to join me in thanking both Sebastiano and Alberto for this amazing conversation. Thank you for